Alright, so getting back to the roots of what this channel's been about for a very long time. I'm playing some multiplayer Commander again, using the multiplayer list that is, but 1v1 setting. So here's the deck list that I was using. With some small tweak, I had the Delve cards in here for a little bit, Dig and Cruise, but I ended up taking them out. Pretty much what it happens is that the Delve cards don't play too nice with Dark Confidant, and if you get Necro going, you're fine either way, but Confidant's really good early. The Delve cards are better mid to late game, and so mid to late game I'd rather just go fetch a Necro, and early I'd rather have a Dark Confidant. So for that reason I took them out. Also, they're really scary in a format where you're potentially running them into a mana drain. They have some drawbacks, and for all those reasons I ended up cutting them. New to this deck is Karn, which I can't say enough good stuff about this card. It's just a fantastic card that fits perfectly into Breya. Does everything that you could hope for from a 4-mana colorless card, although it'd be nice if it were also an artifact, but other than that it's pretty phenomenal. And the other card that I'm running in here for now, at least, is Aven Mind Sensor. This is a nod towards how combo can be difficult, and it gives you a little bit extra of a way. I mean, there are a lot of tutors in the format. Aven Mind Sensor does a pretty good job of mucking those up, and just like there's a lot of artifacts in the format and we want to be prepared for those, I figured let's go ahead and also do the same for the tutors. Mind Sensor's probably the best bet for doing that, so we'll see if it ends up staying. The card is a bird wizard, so if necessary you can name Wizard with the Cavern of Souls, which would allow you to play Mind Sensor, Trinket Mage, Snapcaster, and Dark Confidant. They're all wizards. It would not hit your Stoneforge, and it would not hit Breya itself, but there could be a scenario I could see where that might be worthwhile if like you just really needed to resolve, for example, both a Confidant and a Mind Sensor. You had them both in your hand and you were playing against a deck where getting those down was more important than getting Breya down. Then you might name Wizard with the Cavern of Souls. So there's that. The only bad thing, of course, is that you might deluge your own Mind Sensor off the board, which is a bit of a bummer. If it hasn't provided you value, then you're freeing your opponent up at that point. Whereas if you deluge a Trinket Mage, Snapcaster, or Confidant who's been around for a little while, it's a lot less painful because you've already gotten the cards off of them. So we'll see how it goes, but that's the thinking for now. There's also a very high number of disenchants in this deck. Fragmentize is replaced land tax because a lot of times the counter to land tax is a bunch of artifact mana, and that's going to be harder to deal with anyway. So playing land tax and making yourself in an even worse position if your opponent gets a Soul Ring draw is not, I don't think that makes as much sense as simply playing Fragmentize and putting yourself in a better position if your opponent gets a Soul Ring draw. And if you get the Soul Ring draw, you could take advantage of land tax, and we have in the past, but there's probably better things to do. And tax, I do think tax and Scroll Rack together in the same deck is very, very nice. Certainly we could maybe replace the Mind Sensor and it could go back to being land tax, and then we could try to find room for a Scroll Rack. But then at the same time you also want to fit in 3 basics, 4 preferably, but some way to pick up a land or otherwise get a land off the table so that you can forcibly activate land tax. I usually use Gush, Daze, or the counterspell that picks up a land. So there's some options there, but again, you're talking about a matter of taking more and more card slots away just to try to get that effect that is pretty good, but isn't necessarily as reliable in a Soul Ring dominated format. So I cut it for now. We'll see how that ends up going, but there's lots, like I said, lots of disenchants. Fragmentize, Disenchant, Seal Cleansing, Vandal Blast, and Byforce all in here because it's very important to make sure that you've got solutions for Soul Ring and Sylvan Library and cards like that. So usually we're talking Crypt, Soul Ring, and the lot, or things that get powered out quickly with with fast mana. So sometimes somebody vaults into something like a Gilded Lotus. If you can kill the Lotus with a disenchant, then you can leave the vault alone for a while and be okay. So that's where the deck's at now, and I'm going to run you through some games. Oh, I suppose there's one other change. This is fairly new. Throne of the High City. I may have mentioned that it was in the deck before. It actually ended up making the cut. And the other card, incidentally, that I'm not using, Weathered Wayfarer, might actually be better than land tax, specifically because Throne of the High City is in here, and you can go get it along with Workshop and Strip Mine and so forth. But at any rate, for now, we are where we're at. Throne of the High City, it's just one of those cards that it's not what you're crafting your game plan around, but between Throne and Cavern of Souls, it's very, very difficult for a blue player to sit back and play a draw-go game with you, because if you can find either of those lands, you can punish them pretty hard. Cavern of Souls lets you get Breya down and start forcing them to be active rather than reactive, and Throne of the High City puts them in a position where they've got to figure out what to do about a card that they can't really interact with, or you're just gonna overwhelm them with mana sources and the ability to deploy too much on any given turn. So with all that, let's take a look at some games. And what I want to do is, I think last 7 days format, Commander, take out the 1v1 stuff and take a look here. So as you can see, it's been doing very, very well. I did have a loss to Dark Blue Ad here, and then quite a few victories afterwards, and I had a loss to Anthony Giuliani, who's one of the people that's a fan of the channel and has commented quite a few times, usually for good effect. This loss against Anthony Giuliani, which I'll play in a moment, was a little bit frustrating for me because I had, as you can see, the deck is just loaded with fast mana, tutors, and disenchants primarily, right? And backed up with a lot of counter magic. And I played against him, and if I remember, I got no fast mana, no tutors, no disenchants. And I lost artifacts. So a little bit frustrating there, but we'll get to it in a moment. So I'm going to run through pretty much as many of these games as I can, and you'll see. Now in the beginning here, the evolution was such that I don't think I had by force in these earlier versions, which was a mistake, I think. So that might have been, yeah, I had Divine Offering instead. Okay, so my opponent just decided not to play against Breya. That's fine. I had Divine Offering, and I didn't have the Aven Mind Sensor, and I didn't have by force. So I was using the Delve cards. I didn't have Dark Confidant. There were a few changes in the beginning that I have since undone. And so here we are, facing down a Liliana Heretical Healer. Yeah. And I've got a very nice draw against my opponent, who may try to flip, and he did. He walked into exactly what I wanted. So I brainstorm in response, sack, and plow the Liliana with the flip trigger on the stack, which means I get to kill the Fume Spitter for free as well. My opponent makes a comment applauding that, and on my turn I get a Winter Orb down, but he's got a Cabal Coffers, so I'm going to go ahead and gas up a little bit and then chill out on a counter spell. I've got a Seal Cleansing in my hand, and I'm feeling pretty good about this. My opponent gets a Ratchet Bomb down. That is going to be too slow. Seal of Cleansing can take care of that, so we'll go ahead and not counter that. Play a Seal of Cleansing. My opponent makes a big mistake. I think he's under the impression that Seal of Cleansing is a disenchant, so he sacks the Ratchet Bomb in response to the seal, and of course it's a permanent. It's not a sorcery or an instant, so he loses the Ratchet Bomb, and I get to keep Seal of Cleansing. So now we're just playing a little bit of a waiting game while I look for mana sources and develop. If my opponent does nothing, then that's great. If he does something, then I'm going to of course respond to that. Opponent Grim Tutors, I let that go. He could be getting a land that I can't counter, but probably it's going to be okay. I go ahead and deploy Breya here. I'm holding Soul Ring. I'd love to get it on the table, but Soul Ring doesn't help Breya much. I mean, it helps with activation cost and replays, but in the initial cast, it's not doing anything for you generally. So destroying one of my lands to get a Soul Ring down here, effectively destroying it under a Winter Orb, didn't make any sense. I was just going to wait one more turn and then use the Felwar to play the Soul Ring, or if I could find a land that I could pitch to Mox Diamond, then I'd be good there. But at this point, my opponent just gives up, which is fine. I don't see, if his deck's based around somehow using Liliana Heretical Healer, then it's not going to work out too well against Brea, especially with, as usual, Mono Black has a really tough time with Winter Orb. So play this game against Jagre. Yeah. So I keep this because it has a top to help smooth things out. I am playing against a mono green commander, but also I have a Divine Offering to kill a Soul Ring. Opponent misses a land drop for some reason. I have no idea what this indicates, like what this person kept a no land hand for. But I'm going to go ahead and get, as you can see, confidence in this version. This version had Confidant and Divine Offering, didn't have Aven Mind Sensor, but anyway, he gets an Arbor Elf, and I'm just going to use Confidant top to take no damage, get a Breya down, who I can use to pick off his Arbor Elf soon. Opponent takes the opportunity to play a Sylvan Ranger so he can get some extra mana down. But it really is kind of a break even for him because I'm going to, of course, kill the Arbor Elf. I find a counterspell off of the Dark Confidant and go ahead and kill his Arbor Elf. He plays his commander. I let that through. Use Sensei's Divining Top to make sure I don't take any damage. I knew what the top of my library was, so that was the reasoning for not messing with his commander, but also because I have a Breya in play, so it doesn't really matter to me. His commander, Marwyn, it has to get counters on him before it actually does anything. He plays a Lightning Greaves, a Viridian Zealot, sends in with a 1/1. I'm going to let all this stuff happen because I'm holding Mystical Tutor. Then in my opponent's turn, I go ahead and Divine Offering his Lightning Greaves, use Thran Dynamo, and oh yeah, I did have Treachery in this version too. So there have been a few changes, but alright, so my opponent blocks and uses his Wirewood Hivemaster to fetch an Elvish Archdruid. I'm just taking it easy here. I'm going to go ahead and use top and sack it with the use on the stack so that I end up +1 card. I'm going to go ahead and Treachery his commander and put some mana and untap all of my lands. And Mystical Tutor for a, well, it's about to go in my hand, Mind Twist. We'll Mind Twist that card that he just fetched up away. And pass for the turn. So my opponent's he's in top deck mode, no commander available to him. He plays an Essence Warden for his draw phase, and this game's, basically over. We're just going through the motions now. I'm going to Trinket into probably Map. Yeah, and this is where having this land in the deck is so nice because you can just Trinket in. Quite often you Trinket in a Map and then go get thrown, and just start drawing 2 cards per turn forever. Confidant, of course, is here, so it's really 3 cards per turn at this point. Opponent could send in with both creatures, forcing me to block with a Confidant or lose the Monarch, but actually I would just block with Trinket Mage, lose the Monarch, and then attack back and get it again. And in my opponent's turn, and he'd be down a creature. He'd be up a card in hand, though, so it might have been smart for him to do it. It's certainly his last chance. Anyway, I'm going to use Workshop to power out a Breya here, giving my opponent a bunch of life with Essence Warden. I don't care about that slightly. Drawing extra cards here and throwing away a bunch of excess. Basically, I can put this game away in a moment. Opponent plays Lead the Stampede off the top. I will counter that. That's too many cards he could be drawing. Alright, I found a mana drain. It's just getting real ridiculous now. Go ahead and play a Chromatic Lantern here, and we're into the ability to clear his board, which is going to be Umezawa's Jitte. And from there, I'll just totally take over the game. I'm not even sending anything that he might be able to block. I left his commander untapped because I like the mana that it provides. But I get to draw a card at the end of the turn from the Monarch. I'm going to play some garbage elf tutor thing. Goes and gets a Wreck Sage. I guess that's his last hope. Reclamation Sage will win this game for him. I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and Mystical Teachings at the end of his turn, fetching Vampiric and Vampiric Tutor. And Vampiric Tutor is for a Karn, because I like Karn a lot. It's a lot of fun to play that card. I mean, at this point, it's just how do you want to win the game, right? So I figure Karn will be a fun way to do it. So go ahead and just copy and get some more blue into play, and use his commander to generate a ton of mana. And about to play a Karn, and Karn's going to kick out a what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, a 9/9, and then a 10/10 on the next turn, which seems pretty good. So it'll be 2 10/10s, one of which will be smashing in. At this point, my opponent finally gives up, which seemed reasonable. Anyway, so here's the game against Anthony, and you can see Anthony Giuliani here, and you can see how this plays out. It's very, like, I can't mulligan that against Azami, and I can't remember. I mean, I guess I could have, and maybe I should have, but I mean, a fast Thran Dynamo seems good, right? Unfortunately, just get a little bit of disruption with the strip mine, but of course that wasn't really an important land. If I were him, I would have stripped there too, because of the fact that I paid life to pay the Skull Clamp, so it looked like maybe I was short on lands. The problem is he's following up with an Ancient Tomb into Coalition Relic here. So he's just got too much mana, and I'm delayed massively by this. Alright, so I find a Toxic Deluge, which is good, and a Strip Mine, and I opt to get the Thran Dynamo out now and Strip Mine later because of the Coalition Relic. And so I'm figuring he'll play his commander here, and I'll deluge it, and then I'll be fine. But what actually happens is much worse for me. Tezzeret into a Revoker on Dynamo. Okay, well, I can't actually cast this deluge because I need 2 more mana to play it. I can't afford to strip mine because he's got Coalition Relic Tezzeret, and if I do that, then he's just going to win on the back of those, and no other efforts required. He Merchant Scrolls into Force of Will to ensure that Azami gets down. Azami, of course, starts drawing him cards. It's now backed up by Force of Will. Okay, well, I've got to get the Force of Will out of his hand in order to be able to play anything later, so we'll play Deluge now and hope that I can force, and hopefully he either didn't have a second blue card or the blue card he had was vital. Unfortunately, it was not. It was just a mental misstep. And then he transmutes into Paradox Engine, and with the single spell, like Tezzeret into Sensei's Divining Top, he now can go infinite, cast top over and over between Azami, Paradox Engine, and top. He gets to draw his whole deck, make all the mana he wants, and kill me with the Brain Geyser. So I scoop. Very frustrating though. Played this entire game with 0 disenchants, but well done for him. Beating me, and after that I added more disenchant action into the deck because I wasn't happy with the way that felt. Honestly though, I'm not sure that I would have done much different there. I think the way our draws lined up, he was just destined to win that game. I don't know what else I could have done. I mean, maybe I could have played the strip mine early, but my hand was clunky, a little bit slow. The workshop didn't really find anything that was going to fix it, and it just wasn't a good spot. All right, so here I'm playing against a guy, and I get an early Soul Ring into Throne. Opponent has some creatures that aren't super threatening. I will have to kill some of them, however, both of them, Vindicate and whatnot, in order to make sure that I stay the Monarch. So the Soul Ring is actually the Monarch effect is actually another really strong effect because of Soul Ring being in the format, because of the fact that you can sometimes turn Monarch on early. Alright, so here I'm just writing out, I've got a Forbid with buyback, a Vandal Blast in case my opponent can do anything useful there, and I've got an active Jeté, so opponent sends in with his 1/3, not realizing I can make it a 0/2 and double block, so I do. And of course that was a bit of an error there. I go ahead and send it with my team, pumping up my guy +2 and recasting Breya, equipping and passing. I still have Tomb untapped, so he can't do like a control magic effect here. Unless he can sweep the board of artifacts, and white has very few ways to do that effectively. He's pretty much toast. I draw Force of Will for the turn, he's definitely toast. And notice, of course, I've still got the Monarch running. Part of the reason why I have so much of an advantage here. Alright, I'll go ahead and kill his 1000-year elixir. Transmute a muddle, and just lock this game down. With Winter Orb there, Mishra's Workshop's going to go ahead and cast it for me, end the turn with Forbid. A Force of Will, and a draw a card off the Monarch, probably. And also an Ancient Tomb up, which means I can sack to Breya, I can activate Jete, I've got a Forbid with Buyback, or a Forbid with Force of Will and a blue card if I find one, so yeah, that was a bit ridiculous there. In a great and fun way. We had a number of turns. So the thing I love about Brea is that like you do really well, and the deck's very fun to play. It's very controlling, but the thing is, like, you get games. Like in the 1v1 format, the games were over sometimes on turn 2. So like your opponent goes Mana Dork and you go land, and they go land Leovold and you go land, and look at your hand and say, I guess I lose now, or fill in Leovold with Timna. It's like super frustrating, right? There's no plays you can do to catch up. There's nothing you can do to rebalance the situation. You know, you can't draw a Necropotence and work around the Leovold. Like, there's just nothing. And whereas in this, while you can often get control and get in good spot early, this looks really good, by the way. Opponent's playing Brago and has a very fast start. And this is like what I mean. Here's a format where my opponent can get 5 mana out on turn 2, and so can I. And I can potentially beat him. Alright, and I push a Dak Faden down, steal his Azorius Cluestone, play a map with exactly 2 mana floating, and so I could either pump the mana into the Azorius Cluestone and do something like Mystical Tutor, Divine Offering. I could Crucible Worlds, or I could just sack the map here. And so what I was probably going to do is put the mana in the Cluestone. Oh no, I wasn't even going to put the mana in the Cluestone. I was just going to sack the map and go get, again, in this case, probably Strip Mine, because I have the Crucible in hand. And then end of turn Mystical Tutor for whatever, and then Strip Mine my opponent. Hardcast Jace, do my thing, and on the next turn recast cast Crucible, restrip mine, and so if my opponent wasn't going to scoop to what was happening just now, he obviously did, but if he hadn't been, then he certainly would have been scooping to what was going to happen shortly thereafter. Alright, so I'm playing against Doopy. Doopy's playing Tasigur, so this is usually a good battle. And I've got a very, very weak start, but it has Deluge, and that can often be important. Here I do not have artifact removal for Soul Ring, which is always bad. So I'm going to go ahead and Tithe Trick, holding control, and did not find a solution to Soul Ring. So I'm kind of in a lot of trouble here. Opponent plays a Gitrog monster. Fortunately, doesn't have a sack land to go with it. I've got to sweep this board now before he does, which means I'm opening the door for Tasigur or any other number of things that could be going wrong. Opponent has a Mana Flare that draws him cards. Zendikar Resurgent. Fortunately, I have Tezzeret the Seeker into Winter Orb. Unfortunately, he's got Rexage, but I can will. And I decide that I have to will here because too dangerous him having that personalized Mana Flare. He's complaining about Winter Orb here. A deck with Soul Ring and a personalized Mana Flare that's drawing him 2 cards per turn. Complaining about Soul Ring is amusing to me, but I just carry on with the game. Or complaining about Winter Orb, rather. Anyway, so I've stabilized the board state and I'm able to play a Necro here and pass, but I'm still in a, like, my opponent's got tons of threat in the sense that he's got access to so much mana there, plus he's got a Ramanap Excavator, so there's a lot of things that can go very wrong here. Fortunately, so he's just this Battle Cruiser style deck, which makes it a lot easier for the counter deck to deal with. He plays a big Tasigur, a Mana Crypt. It makes this even worse Farseeks, I'm going to let all that go, and then he plays Tasigur activation. So he activates Tasigur, I just give him a Farseek back. Okay, so I didn't need to counter, which is great because I don't want to tap lands because I'm in a pretty bad spot here as far as my mana goes. I am able, however, to Dack Fayden and take his Soul Ring. And I find a disenchant. I'd like to fire it off on that Zendikar Resurgent, but he's got enough mana available that I'm not quite ready to do that yet. I'd rather sit on Remand. So I go and let Dack Fayden die, but I'm able to kill his Ramunap Excavator and Reclamation Sage. And on my turn, I take out his Zendikar Resurgent, leaving him with just Tasigur there. I've got a couple extra mana floating. I copy Artifact, the Soul Ring, so I've now taken his Soul Ring and copied it, and I'm beating him with his own Soul Rings, which was satisfying. And I've got a Merchant Scroll here, so what I was probably going to do is Merchant Scroll and then play Expedition Map and pass, and I would have liked to have gotten a Mystical Tutor so that I could go get by force and take out the rest of his artifacts, potentially. I'm not 100% on that, but yeah, so this was interesting though, because that Yawgmoth's Will early on to get Winter Orb back into play was probably the thing that saved me. I was in a really bad spot this game, but obviously, like, with some good preparation and such, you can still beat the really overpowering cards that you will face, either by having your own or just, you know, having possible solutions. And Winter Orb definitely is a solution to a number of problems that you can deal with. My opponent plays a Bloodchief Ascension here, and I Vampiric Tutor after the beginning of the end step, which means he doesn't get the counter. I go ahead and play a Chromatic Lantern on my turn using Ancient Tomb, so he does get a counter there, but it allows me to get a quick Gilded Lotus into Necro into play, which is going to give him yet another counter, but not a third. Not yet anyway, so I'm very cautious. Like, if he gets a third counter on that, he could just crush me, especially Necro's taking me to 16 already, along with Ancient Tomb. Alright, so my opponent... So yeah, the Ascension triggers at the beginning of the end step, so if you let the Ascension trigger and he gets no counters, then you can cast a Vampiric Tutor, and the trigger's already happened, so he still gets no counters, if that wasn't clear already. Anyway, so I'm going to take out his Bloodchief Ascension there, play some fast mana and agitate. My opponent's going to try to keep up with my fast mana by flooding the board with a Thran Dynamo into a Sensei's Divining Top. I guess it's not exactly flooding the board, but it's certainly getting him there. As for me, I'm in a Mystical Tutor, which I can't get the card into my hand though because of the Necro. Vandal Blast. And my opponent, of course, I assume anyway, would tap his top there, but he just has had enough, I guess. And the card that I Mystical Tutored for was Forbid. So I thought about maybe getting Mind Twist, but with a ton of mana, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 17, 13 mana in play, I thought Forbid made a lot more sense because I've got the Necro going, and I could just kind of hold the line there, get Breya down, eventually gain some more life or draw extra cards. Most likely I would have played Breya. If I sack the 2 fly, so this is a little weird. So if you play Breya and you sack the 2 flyers, you gain 5 life with Breya's life gain ability, which is drawing 5 cards with Necro. If you feed him to a Skull Clamp, you actually spend a card, because you have to play the clamp, and then you only draw 4 cards. So actually, with Breya in play, it's better to you play the Skull Clamp, sure, but you might actually be better off eating it for life and using the life via Necropotence. So. Alright, next opponent was Potato Guidance. Interesting name. And my opponent's playing Tatyova, Benthic Druid. Anyway, this is a pretty good card. Looks like it'd be a really good card for Brawl format, the Magic format, for basically based on Standard. I don't know if anyone plays that. Now that I understand Brawl, the creature, is banned. Anyway, I've got a roaring start here, so I'm going to get Breya down. The only bad thing is I don't have a refill, so I have 1 defensive play in my hand, Mana Drain, and I've got a little bit more mana in my hand, well, 4. But like all of my defenses right now is Breya and that 1 Mana Drain. Fortunately, I do find a Sensei's Divining Top, and Sensei's Divining Top does exactly what I need it to do and reveals to me a Jace the Mind Sculptor. And with that, my opponent gives up. I probably could have run the Jace through the Mana Vault and then vaulted in order to play Jace. And I mean, I could have used Crypt Mana to play Vault, and vaulted Mana to play Jace, and then Jace that top back into my hand and replayed it. I could have, but I felt like I would just play the... It's effectively disenchanting the Mana Vault in order to get the top into play. But I felt like I'd just wait a little bit. I'll go ahead and Jace, get some cards in my hand, and then next turn I've got so much spare mana I can easily play Vault top and still be fine. Plus there was a chance I'd mana drain something, and then I could just throw the mana into recasting the top and playing the Vault for free. So anyway, Potato Guidance scoops it up there, and we go into the next game against Mr. Breeze. Just me and Mr. Breeze. Alright, so I have to mulligan the first hand, and my opponent, he's playing Darien, King of Keldor, not a commander that I've ever been too impressed with, and I misclick here. I play Land, No Ponder, Pass. But I think, oh, maybe it wasn't a misclick. It was because I knew the top card was Counterspell and I wanted it. So I'm actually just slow rolling my fetch cards because I don't exactly know how my opponent's deck is going to develop, and I'm not sure what I need to get. I don't have a disenchant, and so I'm always hesitant to burn through all my tutors if I don't have a disenchant to deal with artifacts and enchantments, because those are one of the primary threats of the format, so you kind of want to be cautious with that. However, when my opponent really isn't, he's not flooding. Also, I thought maybe I might want a way to deal with White Weenie if that was the plan from my opponent. But since not too much is going on over there, I'm able to just go get a Crypt and sack my Throne and put myself in a position to draw 2 cards per turn. Throne just plays so well with Crypt and Vault. Alright, so now I'm going to steal my opponent's Marble Diamond and pass, hoping that he can't get through to me and steal the Monarch. But if he does, I'll just attack back, right? Instead he attacks Dak Faden, so I let that happen. I've stolen my Marble Diamond. Dak Faden's protected my Monarchy, and I'm able to wasteland my opponent's Keldor and Outpost, play Breya with some 1 mana floating in case he has Mana Tithe, and at this point I'm now drawing 2 cards per turn. He fails to make a 1/1 in response to killing it, but I think it's because he was 1 mana short. So he gives this guy Pro Blue with Brave the Elements so he can steal the Monarchy for a turn, draws a card, and then of course I'm just going to attack back. But meanwhile I've got Yawgmoth's Will and to Strip Mine, Dak Faden replay, and a Demonic Tutor replay. I'm not going to use the Strip Mine here because I want it to stay in the graveyard. So I steal the Monarchy back, draw off a Dak, throw away some stuff I don't want, draw an extra card, throw away more cards I don't want. I'm fairly certain here that the game bugged out because there's no way I would have kept a Polluted Delta over a Force of Will. But at any rate, the rest of this did happen. I don't know, maybe I did do that. I remember being a little bit tired when I was playing this game. Alright, so I'm just spinning through some cards. You have to be careful. I had a Yawgmoth's Will running, so anything I discarded to Dak Faden or for any other reason gets exiled, so you always want to keep that sort of thing in mind. So I'm going to go ahead and kill some of my opponent's board, draw extra cards, set myself up with an infinite Strip Mine recursion situation. Opponent plays Mother of Runes. This game's over. I'm not quite sure what he's hoping here. I've sacked the Mana Crypt to Breya, so I'm not even going to die from Mana Crypt damage. But since he wants to keep running it, that's fine. I'll go ahead and do that. So I go fetch Sword of Feast and Famine with Enlightened Tutor, equip that, send in, and get all of my mana back. And at this point, finally my opponent gives up, but fair enough, fair enough. Anyhow, so I suppose if he hadn't, I could have, I mean, there's quite a few different lines I could have taken, but first we kill the Mother of Runes, and then from there, I don't know. Most likely I'd just play Grim Monolith, tap it for a bunch of mana, or, tap it for mana, spend some of it to kill Mother of Runes, and sacrifice most likely the Marble Diamond or maybe the Talisman, and then use the remaining mana to muddle the mixture into a Umezawa's Jitte. Alright, so Angel is Cool, 1. Plays me in the next round. And is playing a Zakama, Primal Calamity. Gets an early fast start with Exploration, but then runs out Helix Pinnacle, so kind of a waste of time there. Does get a Mana Flare down, which makes it more interesting, that Helix Pinnacle, but I'm going to use the Mana Flare mana myself to cast Fact or Fiction, and I find a Fragmentize. My opponent's trying to decide how to separate it and decides to offer me Deluge, land, no Fragmentize, no Worn Power Stone. So I take that. And on my turn, after thinking about how I want to do this, eventually I settle on Demonic Tutoring into a Tezzeret, untapping some mana, and then Mind Twisting my opponent's hand. This is all because of the Mana Flare, giving me double mana. So my opponent, for their turn, draws a Stuffy Doll, charges a Pinnacle, and passes. On my turn, I've now got some white mana, finally. And again, Mana Flare mana providing me tons and tons of mana. Breya comes down, Dak Faden comes down, I steal Stuffy Doll. I play a Winter Orb off of Tezzeret the Seeker. And then finally, Angel is Cool 1 decides to pack it in. Yeah, it's pretty much over here. If my opponent, of course, hadn't given up, then I would have fetched a Skull Clamp with Tezzeret, and then clamped Thopter Doll and just drawn 6 extra cards. And I'm sure I would have found a disenchant at some point that I could have used to kill a Mana Flare. But either way, if you can't, I couldn't kill it, so I had to abuse it instead, and that worked out fine. All right, so I had to mulligan here against Selawak, but I have my opponent's playing Grand Arbiter, and I have a disenchant, and Grand Arbiter is only generally threatening if they have early fast mana. I draw by force, destroy his my opponent plays first turn Field Mist Border Post, picking up a land, so I go ahead and pop that, and my opponent just gives up. I thought about using disenchant there and saving by force for maybe multiple things, but that felt a little too greedy. I used by force there instead, because if my opponent went land tax, which I assume is in any deck running Field Mist Border Post, then I wanted to be able to go land, disenchant the land tax, cast Grim Monolith, and pass. And you can see I'm holding Treasure Cruise here, but again, not an early game card. It would have been a little while before I could have played it, and it would have been much better if that had just been a Dark Confidant in my hand instead. So, alright, Dead Calavara 91 is playing a Rafik deck, and I've got a nice reasonably paced start, although I do not have a disenchant, the thing that you always kind of should be gauging opening hands by a little bit. But I take a little bit of a risk and keep that hand, and the risk pays out pretty well here. I make a error here. I should have named red off of the Coalition Relic, because now I can't charge I had to use the relic for red, and I can't charge it at the end of my opponent's turn. He plays something and apologizes to me, which was weird. I don't know if he was apologizing because he thought his board state was so good, or there was some other reason, like, hey, sorry man, I know this is like a devastating board I've got. I'm not really sure. Anyway, on his turn though, he plays a Nazaln Revered Bladesmith, goes and gets the appropriate piece of equipment. It is now a 7/4 indestructible. What shall I do? At the end of my opponent's turn, I'm going to go ahead and whir. First of all, into Sword of Feast and Famine, charge my relic. Go ahead and equip Breya. Fetch, use Demonic Tutor, and use Muddle to get Demonic Tutor, use Demonic Tutor to get by force, attack, get all of my mana back. We'll go ahead and by force away all those artifacts over there, and then with the big Breya on the board, I'll Toxic Deluge and kill all those creatures too, and pass for the turn, leaving my opponent with just what you see on the board there. His entire board basically got smoked by one on a single turn, and he had to discard to the Sword of Feast and Famine as well. And at that point, my opponent just gives up. But what's really gross is that I have Charge a Relic, Yawgmoth's Will, pre-combat, play whatever, attack, get all my mana back, follow up with even more gross plays. So if my opponent hadn't given up, the next turn would have been the previous turn, even except worse. So kind of awesome, actually. All right, so Guerte here. Guerte is playing Duretti, and I've got a fast start. So I keep it, and I hope that it's going to be good enough because I don't have any disruptions. So Duretti's always a massive threat if the opponent gets a if they get a Soul Ring draw, and I didn't have any disruption for that. But I was hoping that I could jam out Breya fast enough to deal with it. And luckily, well, in the face of this incredible start, my opponent just gives up, which was really good because I had no other action, just mana. Excuse me. And then starts a series against Dark Blue Ad. So Dark Blue Ad beats me in the first one and then keeps replaying and has a bit of trouble in the subsequent games that we play. And I'm trying to remember why I lost this first one. I was playing Marin of Clan Tooth Noir. So I lead off with the Ponder, and I find some lands, so I decide not to shuffle, I think. Or no, I decide to shuffle. I find some lands, but I decide to shuffle because there's nothing broken going on in there. Opponent leads off with a Spore Frog. So, like, this is not the kind of situation where I would expect to have lost, but apparently I did. So I go ahead and get a Stoneforge down. I've got Force of Will in my hand. A lot of blue cards, so things are looking good. And I decide I'm going to go get Sword of Feast and Famine, and this may have been part of the problem. I should have gotten Umezawa's Jeté against this opponent. Plays an Elvish Visionary, perhaps. I don't know. I was thinking I wanted more mana. I should have Mystical Tutored perhaps for Tithe here as well. A lot of things it could have done differently, but missing land drops after having shuffled away the others in order to get a Trinket Mage is pretty bad. And oh, yeah, that was the other deal. My opponent gets a Gaia's Cradle, and now he can play his commander. I feel like I have to force a will there, get my sword on the board, hope that he sacks a Spore Frog, and as a and that it hurts his mana because of the Gaia's Cradle. You know, it'll take away mana from him. Hoping to draw a land, obviously. Ugh. So I wanted, I've got Mystical Tutor there, so I figure, okay, here's what I'll do. I'll brainstorm into a land, then equip the sword and attack. And it'll be good either way. I'll either kill a Spore Frog or I'll get all my mana back, and then I can cast Trinket Mage. And I brainstorm into no lands at all, no mana, nothing, no Swords to Plowshares, just nothing. And that was basically me fumbling a game. And if you notice, these other games were 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 of these games were today, and then a handful of the other ones that I ran through were from the previous day, including the one against Anthony and these others. So, I had made some changes, and I think this version from today is a lot closer to the version that I showed you at the beginning of the thing. But I actually still had, I've still got the Delve cards rather than Dark Confidant and the flyer, and wouldn't it have been nice to have had either Confidant or a flyer to go with that sword in my hand here? Definitely would have. You'll see, of course, that it ends up working out for me in the end, but yeah, not great. So right here I could have slammed either flyer or Confidant. Instead, of course, I get an orb down, which is nice, but not great against just 2 tapped lands. Opponent has a little bit of an awkward start over there in the sense that there's nothing going on. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and pay some life, play a land, and pass. I have a Remand that I can play and an Impulse. If not, I've got this useless Dig Through Time sitting in my hand, just waiting and waiting and waiting. Yeah, I don't like the cards. The fact that, well, first of all, like here it's pretty weak, and then later on I may end up exiling cards I want to Yogg-Will back into play or Snapcaster. It's just, I don't know. It just doesn't quite fit this deck as well as I might like. So Dark Blade jumps into a couple more games here, has some nice things to say, and which I appreciated, and end up suggesting that they check out the channel here. So I keep this hand only because it has a Disenchant in it and the potential to be fast, but as you can see, it was a very risky keep, and if I don't find an answer soon, I'm probably doomed. On the bright side, my opponent kept because they drew a Soul Ring, I think. I don't know though. They've got a ton of mana. Look at this. So on my next turn, do I find land? I do, and it actually produces white, but I'm looking at the situation, and if I disenchant Soul Ring here, opponent's still got access to potentially 6 mana next turn. It's not enough to, and my opponent with only 2 cards in hand, disenchanting Soul Ring, it's just not enough. Like, I actually may have to disenchant that altar because it's part of a, it's really good with Marin. So instead, I'm going to develop here and hope that I can catch up on the board, and I do. I top deck a Mana Crypt, which is phenomenal. So we're going to rush out a Karn and produce a gigantic 5/5 and pass, who's going to grow out of control. My opponent hasn't done anything with all the mana he's got available, and draws and realizes that nothing can be done and gives up. Had they not, though, the beauty of the Karn play is that I can then Stoneforge into something that's going to make my opponent's situation much worse for them. Most likely Sword of Feast and Famine, disenchant one of their cards, get a Lantern into play, and possibly even cast Breya, depending on how all the mana works out. I didn't quite run through it exactly, but certainly some of that, along with Karn providing additional creatures, was going to end that game very quickly. So risky keep, yes, but fortunately it worked out for me. So we move on to the next game. Dark Blue Ad, again playing Mirren. I've got a fairly reasonable hand now. I took Stoic out of the deck. I actually became an extra island, so would have been nice here, obviously, if it had been. Although it ends up working out for me as Stoic. So I'm going to remand this disenchant creature back to his hand just to stall. And that, incidentally, is why I didn't play Ponder or Merchant Scroll in turn 1. Also, I could dig 1 card deeper with Ponder to try to find lands here. I find Disenchant, so I'm going to take a chance again, and I find not just any land, but the land, Mishra's Workshop. So I get to shop into a Gilded Lotus. And pass, and now the fact that it is a Stoic ends up being quite beneficial for me, because here comes the Caterpillar. We don't want that. Here comes Caterpillar, here comes Caterpillar. Alright, so anyway, I was going to be able to, at some point, go get Necropotence was the game plan, and then Gilded Lotus into my hand. Use Gilded Lotus to get it on board, but the mana wasn't going to work out where I could do it during my upkeep and then play it out that way, so I probably would have had to, if I drew a land that would allow me to make that play, then I would probably just go with it, but if not, I would probably have to Merchant Scroll into something, potentially just something defensive. I'm not exactly sure what I would have done with it, but I guess what I could have done is I could have Merchant Scrolled into Whir, and then Whirred into Opal, and then used Opal to cast Enlightened Tutor, and then Enlightened Tutor for Necro, and then get the Necro down. And if my opponent played an artifact or enchantment, I could even disenchant on the same turn that I played Necro. So I think that's probably how it ran through the next sequence, the next few turns. And then I think we're on the last game against Dark Blood. I think that was 4. And I think that I can't say for sure, but my feeling was that my opponent was probably unclear if the games that we were playing were representative of what this deck does, or if they were flukes. You know, is it just luck, like that the deck consistently performs as it does, or was that actually how that works? So I think, look at this first turn Mana Vault. My opponent, if they didn't have anything, I could have gone Throne of the High City, sack it, pass, and just started drawing 2 cards per turn with a Force of Will up. But with the creature out there, I cannot make that play. So instead, I'm going to Factor Fiction, giving up my only blue card, and then trying to find more of them to fuel the game plan. My opponent, I don't know what happened here, but ends up giving me 5 cards. So okay, most of them are just, other than the Clamp, they're extra lands, but it's still relevant. Opponent Beast Within's my Mana Vault here. There's some madness going on in this game. I'm not quite sure what was happening. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and steal their Skull Clamp. I assume they didn't sack the Secura because they were figuring that drawing 2 cards off Secura was better than drawing just 1 land and putting it into play. After I steal the Clamp, of course they sack it. But now I've got a clamped up beast. Opponent plays Marin, Clantooth, picks up their creature, makes yet another mistake here. So I'm going to go ahead and plus up, figure out exactly how I want to throw away here, end up throwing away Mox Diamond Skull Clamp because I already have a Skull Clamp, my opponent's. And I can will it back at some point later anyway, potentially. I'm going to go ahead and Soul Rings, attempt to steal Marin. I assume they'd sack it to the tower. They missed that. Yeah, this is pretty much over. At this point, I've got everything that I could possibly want here. I'm going to Expedition map into Strip Mine, or most likely a Strip Mine, to take that tower off the board. I've stolen my opponent's Marin. I'm hitting with a beast that my opponent gave me, and it's equipped with a Skull Clamp that also belongs to my opponent. All of which is pretty bad news for said opponent. Again, I go ahead and get Wasteland here, but probably, or Strip Mine, but probably I would have just played Throne and started drawing 2 cards per turn to go with this cards off of the deck. Faden, and also cast Jace and just made it like, so I was seeing about 6 to 7 cards per turn, which is totally insane, right? So anyway, 22 is my next opponent. And this player is running a Sidisi Brood Tyrant. This is what I love about the multiplayer ban list, is that the diversity of decks that you face is just so much. Like, you notice I'm playing against all these different strategies, and they're all viable strategies, and they're all interesting. Anyway, so I've got some speed here. My opponent's got an early Skull Clamp. Of course, you're not going to see a ton of diversity on what I'm doing, because the whole goal is to have a consistency so that we can, adaptability, flexibility, and consistency are the hallmarks of the Breya deck. Opponent misses a land drop here, so I'm going to go ahead and Impulse. I didn't make a play last turn. I didn't play the Mana Vault because there's a chance that I might have wanted to hardcast that Force of Will. So on this turn, I'm going to go ahead and fetch a Fact or Fiction, play a Mana Vault, pass. If he has no further play, he plays a Dryad Arbor, and I think should have clamped it there, but I figure, okay, if they have no further play, I'm going to go ahead and Fact or Fiction. Otherwise, I can always use Mana Vault to cast Force of Will. It's not something pleasant, but I could do it. Anyway, I end up taking Vindicate and a Crucible of Worlds, and I let a Stoneforge, Command Tower, and Expedition map go. A little bit painful there, but top deck a Vandal Blast. But Crucible does get a land back into play for me. Vindicate lets me take out an Ancient Tomb, and the Vandal Blast I top deck kills the Skull Clamp. I was planning to Vandal Blast the Clamp, actually, but this is nice. Opponent gets a Bird of Paradise and a Deathrite Shaman into play. So I guess the problem they were having was access to red. Unfortunately, I've got so much time now that I'm able to play Breya. Unfortunately for them, rather. I tap Crypt and Vault, which are going to die, in order to kill a bird, a Deathrite, and then I'm going to go ahead and play a Winter Orb, which locks down his Dryad Arbor and Swamp. He has to pick one of them. If he untaps, like, I'm not going to, if he untaps the Arbor, then that also opens the window for me to potentially just kill it with Breya. If my opponent untaps the Swamp, then I'm not going to bother. And soon enough, I'm going to be able to slam Dak Faden and start doing Dak Faden, fueling Crucible Worlds, and turning lands into spells, which gets pretty good too. So, meanwhile, I still have Polluted Delta Recursion. It's the only land that I've got there, but situation was very, very strong. So now I play against Zombie Tard, who ends up playing me a few times, and a lot of these opponents end up playing a few times. So clearly they were interested in seeing, testing to see if they could get their revenge, or get a different outcome, and I like that. I respect that. So anyway, my opponent here is playing kind of an elvish, Risk the Redeemed, elvish themed deck. He goes and gets an early elvish Archdruid on top of his library. I've got a Mana Leak in hand though, so I'm not going to tap out. Opponent plays Guiltleaf Archdruid though, and that Archdruid is much scarier than the other one, so I have to counter that because that one lets him tap, I think it's 5 or 7. Well, first of all, whenever he casts a Druid, he draws a card, and a lot of these elves are Druids, like Llanowar Elves, for example, so it's a card drawing engine. But then secondly, if he gets 7 elves out, I think he can tap 7 to gain control of a land. all lands target player controls. So basically, if you get 7 creatures and a Gilt Leaf, you just win the game on the spot, most likely. I think we're going to bug out this game. I don't know if it's because I was clicking around in here or what. Maybe not. I guess this is the way that the game played out. Is that right? This doesn't seem right. No, this is a bugged game. Sorry. I'm just going to drop it and we'll go into the next game against Zombie Tard. But suffice to say, I managed to win. Basically, I got a Brea out and then I got a Jace out, and that was how that went down. Alright, so game 2. Oh, okay. I guess this wasn't one of the opponents that wanted to see how they could do. They just joined by accident. So I keep a pretty nice hand. Any hand with an early disenchant and an orb in play means the only thing this is missing is a sweep for all the elves. It might have been a tough game, but at least I could have gotten a little bit of mana, fast mana, get Breya down, and then I was safe from like a Sylvan Library or Soul Ring. But I didn't play it out. So Fox Slippers is next. Fox Slippers here is playing Neheb the Eternal, a very slow red commander, and you can see I still have Cruise in my deck, and look how awful it is in this hand. And my opponent just decides, though, he doesn't even want to try his luck against Breya, so we move on and I play Fury Power instead. Fury Power running Sidisi, so another Sidisi player, and I've got a much better start this time. Early Mana Crypt into Fetch Land. I have to get a Badlands here in order to be sure that I can play both Demonic Tutor, the card I'm going to go get, which is Mind Twist, and by Force in case my opponent comes roaring out the gate similar to what I just did. Instead, I'm going to go ahead and, it's not his full hand, it's only 5 out of 6, but I feel like this is probably good enough, and it turns out that I was right. I end up taking out a Soul Ring, Living Death, and 3 mana sources, and my opponent scoops. His first turn, instead of Soul Ring, was a Crypt Breaker, who is basically garbage. But had he gone Soul Ring, of course, I might have gone turn 2 by Force or Disenchant, not Mind Twisted him, and then gone for the big Mind Twist on the following turn. Got 100% of his hand. But that little garbagey creature wasn't scary enough for me to worry about it, so that's why I just went Twist for 5 instead of 6, hoping to hit mana sources like I did and buy lots of time, which I did. Alright, so here I'm playing against JK22, who's playing Gaddock Teague, and I've got a hand that should sufficiently address Teague, but it's got a little problems with color, because it really wants black and it really wants blue, and Wooded Foothills can only get one or the other. So I decided at the end I'm going to go ahead and get blue here and then ponder. I have to shuffle, and I don't find anything too great. I'm saving Dark Demonic Tutor for or Mystical Tutor for a Toxic Deluge is the game plan. So I just need to get some black mana here. So I get a Worn Power Stone out. I could have cast it off of a Grim and then had a Mystical Tutor up, but I'm not quite ready to Mystical, because Mystical Tutor for Deluge with no black mana in play is a bit silly. Alright, so I go for a Stone Forge and use the opportunity to play a Grim Monolith. Now I'm sitting on Mystical Tutor. It's getting pretty ugly here. I still haven't drawn black mana. My opponent's, unfortunately, or you know, good for him, he's got a Mentor of the Meek running and he's drawing extra cards. But his threats are very, very tepid, so I've got a lot of time here, a lot more than I should have. So I'm going to go ahead and Mystical Tutor, just because at this point I need to tithe into some black mana, or I'm going to... I don't foresee this going well. Alright, so I'm going to cast Jitte here, equip it, send, and my opponent for some reason doesn't block, which means I can now kill things without having to like, he could have blocked and then I would have killed this guy, but then what? You know, like, I figured he'd... Anyway, well, regardless, he plays a Steely Resolve and gives his Kithkin Shroud, and then tries to play a 2-drop. I take out his Mentor of the Meek in response, because he had exactly 1 mana left, so I don't want him getting extra cards. And I'm not too worried about Shroud, because I've got Deluge in my hand. Then I send in with no counters again. My opponent chooses not to block, which is amazing. So I pump Mystic after combat and then Deluge everything but the Mystic. Opponent plays a Gaddock Teague, and in response I'm going to Factor Fiction. And see, here's yet another game where I'm sitting here holding a Dig Through Time. Opponent doesn't want me to have Winter Orbs, so I get 4 cards, including Treasure Cruise, Tezzeret, Disenchant. But the key card in there was Disenchant, so I'm going to send in with Mystic, hoping he blocks and I can just pump. Instead, he doesn't, so I Disenchant, Steely Resolve, shrink his guy once, attempt to shrink it a second time. He has a response, and I respond to that by attempting to shrink it again, which does stick and counters his pump spell. And then on my turn, I'm about to play Tezzeret, and as you can see, like, here I am with Cruise and Dig. I have a giant graveyard, and I still don't have an opportunity to play either one of them. It's just over and over it hammered home to me that those cards probably just don't belong in this deck. So I think I took them out by this after that game where I realized. But I know they're out for the last game, so we'll see. MTG Mendix is my opponent, and my opponent is playing Azuri, Champion of the Claw of Progress. I don't exactly know those cards too well. So I've got a opening hand that's very, very blue, but also includes a Vampiric Tutor, and I'm hoping we don't have to fight over this Vampiric Tutor, because I don't want to have to force a will here, and I don't have to fight over it. So I strip mine, pre-strip, and then play a Crypt into Fabricate. The strip is not contested in any way, and the Mana Crypt is not either, so I'm able to Fabricate into Crucible, because I see now I've got Force of Will Crucible. Alright, so lose some life there, and then hardcast Crucible. My opponent has no solution. I replay, strip mine, wait. During my opponent's upkeep, I'm going to strip. That way, if my opponent has something like Trick Bind, he's tapped out. Opponent does not have that. Instead, he's got Scoop Bind, and this game is over, and we move into game 2. I like all the different angles of attack that the Breya deck has. Certainly, like, you know, you can do it with Karn, you can do it with card advantage, a Forbid Lock, you've got Necro, you've got Strip Lock. You know, it's fun to have all these different options and not play the 1v1 format anymore, which was so linear. Everything was based around just attacking with creatures and playing your commander is incredibly boring. Anyway, opponent's got an early start. I've got an interesting, like, I kept a Mana Crypt hand, but I have nothing to do with, and a Crucible, but I have no way to take advantage of the Crucible. I do fortunately find a Coalition Relic here. And my opponent, on the other hand, is just developing, but not really applying any significant pressure to me. So I'm going to go ahead and charge a Relic, and then hope to draw a fetch land or a something that I can use with this. But instead, I'm just going to cast Karn with Mana Drain Backup and pass, making a 5/5. And an active Edokin Shackles, it can steal something with exactly 1 power or less. Opponent goes for an Azuri. I let all that happen. So he's trying to pump up his guys and such, but he has no experience counters yet. So I'm going to go ahead and Mystical Tutor at the end of my opponent's turn. After that resolves, charge my Relic. Not doing it before, so I don't get dazed. And then Deluge everything off the board except for my 5/5, who becomes a little bit smaller. Karn out a guy and then attack, so my guy gets slightly bigger. Opponent goes for a Eldrazi Skyscraper, which will kill Karn potentially because he's got Swiftfoot Boots, and after some serious consideration, because it's a 2-power creature that also comes with a 1/1, and the fact that it flies means that, so he plays it, equips it, kills Karn, and I was thinking about it, and I have almost nothing else going on here, so it's a little bit of a risk and certainly a poor exchange for me, but I decided I'm going to Mana Drain that Eldrazi Sky Spawner. Anyway, and my opponent has no way to really punish me here. If he'd have got the Sky Spawner out, he could have made the token and then pumped Nova Gene to make it a little bit bigger, and then sacked the token and moved the boots over and smashed in for 3, killed the Karn. And I mean, it wouldn't really been the end of the world if that had happened, because my opponent could have, because he still had to deal with 2 gigantic constructs. But I don't know. I think this was the right play. The other play was just charge Relic, let him kill my guy, and then cast Breya on my turn, and then attack with 2 9/9s or 10/10s versus 6/6s, and that might have been better, but yeah, worked out fine. So anyway, I play Mr. Breeze here again. So second time in this video. I think the first time was yesterday, though, if I remember right. Anyway, I've got a great draw with an early Soul Ring. This time he's playing Malik. Is it Paragon? I've got it's a great draw for playing a little bit of draw go for a bit. So we'll do exactly that. Just pass the turn. I've got a Whir up, Cryptic, and Remand, but I can't play both a 3 blue casting cost spell and something else, so I decided not to play anything here. I think, because I really do want the Whir to resolve if I am to play it. Try another counter spell, rewarded for patience, so we'll wait. And now I can play Whir and remand it back to my hand if my opponent has something to say about it. So I'm going to go ahead and Whir for 1. If my opponent has nothing to say about it, well, then I get Expedition Map and sack it with the mana that's floating, get a Throne of the High Council, immediately become the Monarch with the counterspell up or Remand, and now I'm drawing 2 cards per turn. And you can see how incredible the Throne of the Throne of the High Council is. I think it's High Council, High City. Anyway, so my opponent taps out for a big threat who has haste, so I counter that. Obviously, he's trying to get the Monarch. Go ahead and play a Trinket Mage on my turn and use it to go get Mox Diamond. I just want more blue mana in play because I've got the Monarchy. So all I really want is for this game to just continue to have each of us make no plays, and I'll draw 2 cards per turn. Opponent plays a Blighted Cataract, which is like an absolutely terrible version of the Throne. Although if he had the Throne, he would have had to deal with Trinket Mage. He could have taken Monarch, but I would have taken it right back. On my turn, I play an uncounterable Breya, so my opponent's blue deck is just getting completely raked over the coals by my lands. On his turn, he plays at the end of my turn, he plays Opportunity. I'm fine with him drawing 4. I've already drawn 3 off a Throne, so it's really just like 1 extra card there, and he's got 9 in hand, so if he doesn't do anything with it, it's not going to matter anyway. He uses removal on my commander, which doesn't do much, and then I'm going to pause it right here. This is not going to work out for my opponent. He plays Talent of the Telepath, so he gets to look at the top 7, reveal the top 7 cards of my library, and then he puts 5 of them into my graveyard, and then 2 of them, because he has Spell Mastery, 2 instants or sorceries he can play from amongst the cards that he reveals. And I do have a Cryptic and a Remand, but I was thinking about it and I was like, this isn't going to work out too well for my opponent. So I decided to take a risk. I let it resolve. He reveals what does he reveal here? He reveals a bunch of lands. So he reveals Karn, which I was disappointed to see, Tithe, which wouldn't help him at all because he can't go get Plains. He doesn't have any in his deck. Strip Mine, Tundra, Misty, By Force, and Merchant Scroll. By Force, you can't pay X mana on this. Otherwise, if you Talent of the Telepath your opponent and they revealed a Fireball, you just instantly kill them with a Fireball for 1,000,000. So X is 0. So he tries to play the By Force. I just ignore it. And then he plays my Merchant Scroll. And as you can see, this is sad times for my opponent, because what it does is it lets me remand the Merchant Scroll back to my hand and draw a card off the remand, which is exactly what I was hoping, why I let the Talent of the Telepath go. I was hoping I'd be able to remand the best spell back into my hand, and that's what happened. I guess Tezzeret here. My opponent's tapped out for an absolutely terrible play in which he drew 2 cards for me and discarded 1 for him, and I go ahead and slam Winter Orb into play. And then to add insult to injury, I used the Merchant Scroll he gave me to go get a Force of Will, and the Monarchy provides me with the Sword of Feast and Famine, which my opponent doesn't know about, but he does know about the Force of Will that he just gave me off of the Merchant Scroll that he just gave me. So that was just a very silly and brutal way to finish a game out. This version, I believe, has finally is constructed exactly as the deck list that I showed you, which I'll show you one more time at the end here. So, and then finally, I'm playing against the Mighty Dragon, who has a Soul Ring. He's playing Krenko. That's how Krenko's good, but I keep, because I have Vandal Blast, I go turn 1 Vandal Blast. My opponent goes draw, miss a land drop. I have Cavern of Souls into Soul Ring into Talisman. Soul Ring off the top, by the way. Pass with Counterspell up and a Brainstorm. Opponent draws, finds no mana, and scoops. So this is exactly why you... I really don't mind Soul Ring. I like Soul Ring in the format, and it is a skill... It is a skill-intensive card because the skill comes in the deck building, and then it is occasionally as well, certainly in using it, but mostly it's in the deck building side, and I think that that's good. Having cards that force you to build your deck in a smart way is interesting. If Soul Ring could be a commander, like if you could use anything as a commander and players were putting Soul Ring in their command zone and saying, oh, that's my commander, or Mana Crypt or something, I would say absolutely not. Like, the ability to access it every game, all game, like on demand, would be absurd. But the fact that it just comes up sometimes, so you have to be ready for it and you can build around it, but you don't have to, like, you're not terrorized, like, because it's a luck based thing rather than a consistent thing. I mean, even you saw earlier the guy that got the Soul Ring, you know, the opponent got a Soul Ring, an Ancient Tomb, an Ashnod's Altar, and a free creature to sack that draw him a card. So he had all this mana and nothing to do with it, because it's not a consistent thing that you can say, well, I'll always have 7 mana on turn 3, so therefore I'll fill my deck with Eldrazi. Like, you can't assume that during deck building. And so it really just makes for a more, I think, a more interesting, fun format where you have ways to punish decks that can't deal with the speed, you know. Otherwise, we saw in 1v1, like when they banned Soul Ring, mono blue became this unholy terror of a deck that you know, rose up because they didn't have to worry about the opponent playing turn 1 Soul Ring. Once they no longer have to answer that question, what will I do if my opponent gets a Mana Crypt, then the deck is just totally out of control. And then of course they banned Strip Mine too to just make it even easier for them. But anyway, I'm getting off the point of the video, I guess, and it's already long enough, but I just thought it was just interesting there how it's one of the things I love is how you can sometimes Fragmentize or Vandal Blast in instant kill, because your opponent will keep like a Soul Ring hand and nothing else, and you just blow it away and then the game ends on the spot, and it's very satisfying, 'cause, you know, to do that. So anyway, yeah, this Mind Sensor, I don't know about it. I'm not sure how I feel, but I just see a lot of potential there. I just haven't had any really come up. I think there's a lot of potential to shut down some nonsense. Like I said, I see it kind of as the white, as a variation on Vandal Blast, in the sense that Vandal Blast deals with the broken artifacts, and this deals with the very powerful tutor effects as well as the fetch lands. To some extent, I mean, sometimes it does nothing. Sometimes the card they want's in the top 4, but it gives you a much better chance against that kind of stuff, especially against, like, there's certain commanders that repeatedly fetch, for example. Like, it's a way to buy some time against the classic example would have been Zur, but there's plenty of others as well. So we'll see if it ends up making the cut, but it is an interesting card to be playing nevertheless. And that's all I've got. So hopefully you've enjoyed yourself. It's kind of back to the multiplayer version, having a good time. I did play the Pauper deck for a little while, and I tried to make the Pauper deck good. The problem is I was able to make it very good, but Pauper is also filled with, like, utterly degenerate strategies that are super linear. Pauper was everything that I hated about 1v1, in which you have, like, very straightforward, degenerate, unfair, like in Pauper, I've been attacked by an 11/9 first striking, trampling, life-linked creature who can't be targeted by spells or abilities, and it's like, what in the like, it's so stupid how, like, it's so dumb how consistent they can do things like that. And because of that, you have to play like you. What I found out is that you have to play black. Like you just have to. I tried using white disenchants and it was nowhere near enough effective enough, because by the time they fire off, first of all, you can't do anything about rancor with white disenchants, or at least I guess it could play erase or something, but it's tough. But secondly, the problem is that they can just stack and stack and stack. Like they're on enough disenchant, so you need to actually address the problem, which is the unblockable creature. And meanwhile, you're losing tons of life, the unblockable, untargetable creature, and that untargetability meant that I think that you've got to pretty much, like, certain decks have some solutions. There's some very minimal solutions in Pauper to stuff like that. White has flag bearers that can draw the enchantments off, and red might be able to elect trickery. But for the most part, if you look at what the decks are doing, that's just one broken deck. There's others that kill you on turn 3 with shadow creature that can attack for 20. There's ATOGs getting flung at your face for 19 or 20 damage or more. There's just all kinds of stuff that's super, super broken, and it takes advantage of the fact that while there's many ways to combo kill somebody, there are very, very few solutions in the format because of the limited nature of the format. And so it's sort of a race to the bottom format of degeneracy, and I didn't enjoy it at all. I could have tried to play the control version of blue-black, filled with edicts and some number of counters and some bounce and stuff. The LSV did a version, not quite the same as what I'm describing, but he did a version of control in his channel. I suppose that is a little bit interesting, but it's also kind of stupid in the sense that it's the only real control deck that you can try to play, and when you go up against the mirror, it becomes this, there's not a lot of skill involved. It's because you don't have as many choices that you can make. So it's really just, did you draw the right cards in the right order, or did they? And I don't know, I just don't care for the format that much. I'm back to multiplayer Commander, which is the format I love. So expect to see more of this. Hopefully you're not bored by it, but and we'll see how things go from here. So that's all I've got tonight, though. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.